Unprecedented in human civilization. Almost half of the world's population represented around one table and speaking with one voice. At Thursday's BRICS Plus Leaders Dialogue in Kazan, Russia, Chinese President Xi Jinping highlighted the crucial role of BRICS Plus nations in advancing global peace, security and growth for the global south. He urged the BRICS countries and its partners to take the lead in improving global governance and make development the core of international economic and trade agenda. A 33-page Kazan Declaration was issued at the end of the summit outlining the common stance, values and aspirations of the grouping. Exactly what messages can we take away from Xi's speech in Kazan and the landmark declaration? How will the BRICS grouping shape our future? Are we witnessing a historic watershed moment? Welcome to a special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, coming to you live from Beijing. To discuss these issues and more, we have from Shanghai, Niu Haibing, Director of the Institute for Foreign Policy Studies at Shanghai Institute for International Studies. From Cape Town, South Africa, Sanusha Naidu, Senior Research Fellow of the Institute for Global Dialogue, an independent South Africa-based foreign policy think tank. And in Wuhan, Central China, Renape Penelope, a Brazilian lawyer and Director of Brazilian Citizens Council of Beijing. Welcome to my three guests to The Point. First, some highlights from President Xi's speech here, and we are hearing pretty big words. For instance, the collective rise of the global south is a distinctive feature of the great transformation across the world. Global south countries marching together towards modernization is monumental in world history and unprecedented in human civilization. President Xi gave that assessment at the BRICS Plus dialogue on Thursday. Professor Niu, what is your takeaway of his characterization here?
I think that this is a very critical moment for the international community, since global south countries are mainly composed by the emerging economies and developing countries. So there is a huge potential for them to achieve a new type of modernization in the human history by adopting the low carbon technology and more inclusive and sustainable economic development. So I think this is a very good timing for them to sit together to discuss how they can cooperate with each other and to make some achievements in this sustainable development agenda.
Ms. Naidu, the collective rise of the global south, very impressive optics, 30 plus leaders representing almost half of the world's population. Are we seeing a Bretton Woods moment like this?
Good day to everyone. I think it's definitely an important point within the context of the global architecture. And I think if you go back to about 75, 80 years ago, that moment around where the Bretton Woods institutions came to life or were given the kind of ventilation to become the major financial infrastructure for the global economy was quite monumental. And I think we kind of seen that kind of significance happen today in the context of the idea that the international system needs to go through a serious or a rigorous kind of reform that will actually open up the system for more kinds of currencies that could be used, particularly along the lines of how to deal with the kind of lock-in that the financial system creates. And I think one of the key points that came in from President Putin's closing statements to the summit yesterday was really this idea that we're not creating an alternative financial system or payment system to the SWIFT banking system. And I think that's important. What it's doing, or what the BRICS are doing, is it's actually opening up the system in a way to say that there doesn't have to be a single set of institutions that govern or underpin or underwrite the international financial architecture. And that's something that you could interpret it as a Bretton Woods moment, but I don't think it's about the Bretton Woods only. It's about the fact that the world in its architecture and its ecosystem is undergoing a significant change.
Renato, what is your take? Is President Xi, for instance, his assessment of the moment being unprecedented in human civilization, is that echoed by leaders from, or by people from other BRICS countries such as Brazil?
Hi, thank you for having me. Yes, in fact, I think Xi Jinping really could sum up what we're living. We're in a world in transformation right now. We're seeing a big change, a financial freedoming process for the global south. His speech has a very interesting take in my point of view when he quote Nikolai Chernyshevsky in his book What to Do, because this book influenced Lenin and the importance of organizing society for the progress. We are living a chaos. We got to understand that in fact what we've been living is a slow process of transition. When Jim O'Neill first thought on the and coined the BRIC concept, I doubt he was thinking about the potential of this commune of countries would come together as it happened in the United Nations in 2006. And then later in 2009, after the global financial crisis, those four countries manifest the need of a multipolar world and a reform of the financial system. And 2010, with the first big expansion, join South Africa. So I think those countries are finding ways. And the choice of the title, too, to strengthening multilateralism for fair global development and security. That's the security that Xi Jinping was quoting and pointing. We are building a world for expansion of these new members, structuralizing ways. We are thinking how to the global world order get a cooperating dialogue. So it's being shared there a space of dialogue and of a new way of governance. So we recognize the United Nations that we can advance with this new global order, this new financial institution that's being developed.
Professor New, let me come back to you. Again, what's on China's mind about how this organization should function, should lead the way in reforms in global governance? If you compare President Xi's speech last year in Johannesburg, South Africa, and his speech this time, you find very major differences. For instance, last time he mostly focused on development and China's development cooperation with African countries in Africa, but this time he talks about three main points, meaning mostly peace and security, development and prosperity, and civilizational exchanges. Why do you think he's taking a different approach this time, especially at the occasion where greater numbers of countries are present?
Yes, you are right. There are more points added by President Xi to the BRICS cooperation agenda. Of course, the BRICS has three pillars: security, development, and civilization. It's understandable in Africa, people focus on the agenda of the development because that's the most thing demanded by the continent. And also, Africa has a huge agenda to promote the regional integration and the trade working group, and also some industrialization. So I think China realized the priorities of the developing countries in Africa. But this time, I think in Russia, this BRICS conference in Russia is the first meeting among the players. The new members are joined together. So in this to this point, I think this BRIC conference in Russia is a global one. The global dimension should be noticed, and also China has developed its idea on the different global initiatives, and I think at the global level, see this year's conference is different from the previous ones. Yes.
Naidu, what is your take coming from the South African point of view? And also, China, in President Xi's speech, under each point, he has China's proposal, for instance, the Global Security Initiative, the Global Development Initiative, the Global Civilizational Initiative. What kind of vision is China trying to paint in the minds of leaders around the world? And how is that potentially in line with the Global South common aspirations?
Well, I think it definitely deepens the message. It deepens the position that China has always maintained and the consistency of that message in terms of there's an alignment of those three broad frameworks. And you cannot have development if you don't have security, but you cannot have the development and security without recognizing that there are states in the world that have a rich civilizational history. And that in itself is critical. If you're talking about the Global South as a collective group or a collective bloc, then you're looking at rich histories in terms of development initiatives, rich histories in terms of how to bring about that civilization that had perhaps elements and even brought modernization to the international system in terms of commerce, in terms of people-to-people exchange, in terms of engagements around developmental initiatives. So these are things that kind of talk to an international system that pivots not just in the aspect or in the identity of being one kind of modernization, but rather recognizing the inclusivity of this international system, which needs to recognize that all countries are a part of this international system. And I think in the case of what we saw with President Xi Jinping's speech last year and the continuity of that speech in various international fora following this BRICS summit in 2023 to the BRICS summit in 2024, and in the interim with the China-Africa forum that happened in September, there was that level in which to recognize that all three initiatives are interrelated. It's a component and it's the sum of all those components that come together as a whole. So I think in many ways, what we are witnessing is also an identitional issue that is coming out much more prominently within the international system around what BRICS and other kind of fora like the BRICS are going to start coalescing around. And that means that we have to start thinking about the international system also from a question around agency. And that's what I identify as part of this collective.
Renato, how do you see, as a Brazilian, the kind of vision that China is trying to lead, its partners together in pursuit of? Is that very different? Is that confrontational with the kind of vision that the West is trying to, build for the world?
Well, that's a very tricky question. There is like a good dialogue with the West. I think she emphasized how we are building something for the South-South relation, but for the North-South dialogue. The North has some difference, and they are used to a process where they tell how the rules are, how the things should work. So they're not used to a multilateral world that we're strengthening right here, right now. So I think that's where things are clashing. The West has a hard, difficult time to deal with the difference, especially culturally or morally. So I think we're in a world where we share different civilizations, and when we build security, we gotta build security for all, and especially social security. So I think like Brazil and China has a strong like connection and common point when it comes to social security, like lifting people out of poverty, all the environmental security. We're facing big crises that's been dragging humankind for long. When you look like the environmental crisis we are living and it hasn't hit us hard yet, when we are dealing with the economical crisis that's been coming since like ages and like we've been trying to avoid, I think was right from the point of view of BRICS to avoid centralizing a new unique currency. So I think like try to put everybody to take its piece of responsibility and share their currency in this new system is also very right and a big change in the system. So the West is used to a center power, a concentration of power, and we're trying here to represent the majority of the world, like the global multipolar world that we're living.
Absolutely. It's fascinating. And let's read into the Kazan Declaration that came out of the meeting. That's released on Wednesday after the meetings are wrapped up. The first ever joint declaration after BRICS expanded. And the declaration, and I take out this key message, for instance, says, we reiterate our commitment to improving global governance by promoting a more agile, effective, efficient, responsive, representative, legitimate, democratic, and accountable international and multilateral system. Professor Neil, there are a lot of adjectives. These are a lot of adjectives. But exactly what is not working for the Global South at this moment? What do we want?
I think the BRICS has some original goals when it was created. That was to improve the global financial governance system by improving the voices and voting powers of the emerging economies, mainly the three major ones, China, Brazil, and India. But later, I think especially after the financial crisis of the Western countries, and also the recent regional conflicts around the world. So the global South global South countries are trying to bring the development agenda to the queue of the global governance system. So I think it's important for the BRICS to play a leading role by bringing the major players from the Western world to focus on the peace and the development of the global agenda, and also try to deal with the global challenges such as the climate change. I think the BRICS mechanism has played this kind of role to try to bring their attention and the interest of the developing countries to the agenda of the international system.
Ms. Naidu, how has this declaration built on the previous declaration released in Johannesburg, South Africa last year?
Well, I think you can see it in different spaces and in different areas, and that they've built up on the issue, particularly around the financial integration of the BRICS countries, where there's a need now to look at the use of local currencies in terms of payments of goods and services, smoothing out the cross-border transactions, and more importantly, I think, is to look at what has become peace and security, for me, has become much more critical within the BRICS now. And given the outreach engagement that the BRICS countries had with representatives and invited countries to the summit, there was a lot of talk about understanding how that plays an important role in order to achieve the goals and objectives of the BRICS going forward. And I think it was President Xi that said on Thursday that BRICS must be a stabilizing force for peace, strengthen global security governance, and explore solutions to hotspot issues that address both the symptoms and root causes of conflict. And I think that's critical, because that's going to be the big game changer for us going forward. If the BRICS is to achieve its objectives in the kind of international architecture of inclusion, just order, and equitable distribution of resources, and be able to push forward in the type of global arena that needs transformation, then you have to deal with peace and security. And I think that's critical. Also, I think on the language with regard to the UN Security Council reform, we saw that they specifically mentioned Africa in terms of the two declarations that talk about the African position on UN security reform. That is the Isolweni Consensus and the CERTA declaration. And I think what's also interesting now is that we're seeing a much more kind of tempered approach to the kind of expansion of the BRICS, which I think that we have to still think about what does it mean when you now add 13 countries as partner countries into the BRICS? What does partner countries or partners mean in the context of, are they going to become members at some point, and what does this go forward in?
Right. Of course, certainly there are a lot of details to be discussed there, but we are looking at the overall aspirations of the group in general. For instance, Renato, they're calling for the elimination of unilateral economic sanctions and secondary sanctions that are contrary to international law. They're obviously talking about the United States here, right? But how are they going to achieve that? What kind of tangible steps are they going to begin with?
Well, the step was given. The first is a request of a reform in the traditional financial system that the world has been living in. Of course, this reform doesn't seem very plausible, and they don't want to change it because that give a lot of power to one unique nation. So I think what we are talking about here is economical growth with a platform that gives potential to economical growth for the global majority. So like this transborder payment system that BRICS are starting to propose and pointing is already a way out. It's already a way to allow the nations to do business between them. It's not possible. Neighbor nations has to send convert their money to a third money and then pay something that's border to border. So we need a system that can allow this, and that's part of the BRIC payment that's being built. I think strengthening our bank is also a good point. The NDB bank has been going since 2014, and it has a structure with the contingent of reserves of arrangement that has been giving us base to stand on our own. Just recently, Brazil suffered with a big flood in the south, and to rebuild 300 cities, it got a big loan of $1 billion, and this has been helpful. So we are building structures that can allow us. Of course, such a process doesn't happen from day to night or just in a meeting. It takes years, and we've been running this road already since 2006. And I think today, with the end of this summit, we've been seeing how we're progressing and we are getting where we expect to reform the global financial system.
Professor Niu, what is the more practical or the more realistic expectation from people who actually believe in this cause, but also understand the complexity of it and the kind of difficult challenges that may arise in the process? For instance, the United States and the Western powers, they will not be happily giving up their power to be shared by the global South. So how complex, how challenging the undertaking will be?
Yes, I think there are some favorable conditions for this kind of financial cooperation, because the BRICS are the mutual trade and partners, and also they have an increase in mutual investment. And so they have the need to do that. And also they are facing, some of the BRICS members are facing the strong economic and financial sanctions from the US and the European countries. So the BRICS as a whole want to reduce their vulnerability to this global financial system. They are not trying to overthrow the whole financial structure of the world led by the Western countries, but they are trying to diversify the system and to add more financial resources and channels from the emerging economies, then to increase their financial resilience. I think during this roadmap, there are some challenges, of course, from the Western countries. They are the strong economies with a very developed financial system. So, and also they have the world recognized currency. But this should is a long goal to build that. So the emerging economies should develop their technology and mechanisms to develop this kind of cooperation. And also for the emerging economies, they have to do some homework to prepare for this role. So the openness of their capital markets will be a great challenge for them.
Ms. Naidu, I know the BRICS countries are not seeking to be anti-West or to become an anti-West institution, but in consequence, maybe a competition is unavoidable. What do you think BRICS can do to really demonstrate and to really bring in the forces from the West and to show to them that there is room for cooperation between the BRICS and G7, maybe? Is that possible? Or is BRICS going to be out and about, they're directly opposed to G7 and competing for resources in international, global, and economic governance?
Well, I think the first issue to discuss in relation to the question is that you have countries in the BRICS that also don't necessarily want to have that competitive kind of approach to the G7 or to the developed economies that make up the G7 and more. I think if you look at India, they call it Westlessness. You look at the Russian conceptualization of the world, they call it a global majority. So I think these are some of the dynamics from a kind of conceptual way that you find that you cannot be able to try and push yourself into a system that isolates one over the other. And that has been the big challenge in the last 75 years of the international system. It has been kind of underpinned, and the underwriting of the international system has been in the idea that only a few or a select countries can actually stabilize the international system, that need to play a much more kind of embedded and a deeper engagement around institutional building and governance architecture. And those institutions are now in a state of crisis. If you look at the UN, if you look at various other institutions where there's a challenge around whether or not they are able to pivot in terms of the global governance agenda. So in the same way, in the financial architecture, in the governance architecture, we're finding that there comes a point, a tipping point, where the international system needs to start thinking about how it self-corrects. And that self-correct approach has to be one that recognizes that the international system is multilateral. But in creating a multilateral system, you've got to go to recognize that you have to also be much more critical about the engagement. So what we are seeing is an important kind of shift in the kind of thinking around where the inclusivity comes through. But at the same time, the international system, where it is built, it's built in the context of where competition is inherent. So it's very difficult right now, I think, for countries of the global south and countries of the global north to be able to find that common ground. Because what it means is that once you start moving into that kind of level of collective cooperation and collaboration and engagement, it also means who's going to be the countries that are going to underwrite the system. And we keep going back to that point, and we keep having that discussion that there has to be one or two countries that are able to stabilize. When we get to a point where we think about the international system as not a competitive system, but as a collaborative, cooperative system, then I think we'll be able to have all countries in the world, whether you belong in the BRICS, whether you are in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, whether you're in the G7 or NATO, you are part of an international system of collective engagement.
Renato, how many more years do we have to wait before we see that kind of shift? And do you think it is ever going to happen?
I think we're in process. I think this is like coming day to day. As every change, we won't notice. We're gonna just wake up in a new world. I think we can see that from this final statement of BRICS. We reinforce the importance of United Nations, the World Trade Organization. So what we're trying to build is a multipolar world, is strengthening the traditional institutions and asking for the reforms we need. Now, for the last, the President of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, were there present, taking part. Kazan has importance for the Russian history. It represents the time that the Russians could push back the golden horde of Genghis Khan. So it ends like an old empire. It's a point where like multicultural happened inside of Russia, like Islam, like Christianity. So it's an important place for this cultural diversity. That's part of human like
Yeah.
nature and the human
Yeah.
nations. So I think like We're in the process. We are waking up in this world, and I think Brazil get it right when he put the next like BRICS like session to strengthening global South cooperation for more inclusiveness and substantial
Okay.
governance. The
Yeah.
governance will change.
I guess it is unstoppable, the trend of times. It will be long, but it will be moving towards that direction. Many thanks to my guests joining me from Shanghai, Niu Haibing, from South Africa, Ms. Naido, and from Wuhan, Renato Penelope. Thank you very much for following this edition of The Point with me, Li Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and X using the handle Li Xin in Beijing. As always, on behalf of the team, thank you for watching. You've got the point.